Hello, and welcome back to the Out of Program podcast. Today we're joined by Dr. Azeem Alam, who is a specialist registrar in clinical radiology and one of the co-founders of ByteWorld, a medical e-learning and training company. He's probably best known for running the hugely successful ByteLabs Fellowship, which helps clinicians transition into roles in health tech. Azeem, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jing, for that lovely intro, and thank you for having me on.
Brilliant. So we always begin the show with the same question, which is, what got you into medicine? Take me back to the start.
Yeah, so medicine was a degree that I kind of, I guess, stumbled into. Both my parents are doctors, and most of their, ancestors and my ancestors for many generations have been doctors. And I think it was kind of an unspoken thing that, particularly being from where I'm from, which is Pakistan, often the main careers that people are given as options are kind of medicine, law, finance, engineering, kind of the big four. And I think it was always something. I mean, my parents never really pushed me into medicine, but I did enjoy biology particularly. But my favorite two subjects were actually music and ancient history or classics. So my first love was always music. I, learned the guitar from a very young age, learned how to sing, or did little bits and pieces, and was always listening to music and playing music, and got into songwriting at quite a young age as well. And that was my first kind of career in inverted commas of like the first money I made was in songwriting and in the music industry. And my plan was to always try and move over to the States when I was about to sign my first publishing deal. And being around 15 years old at the time, my parents said this probably isn't the best idea for a 15-year-old to move to the States by himself to work in the music industry. So I put that plan on hold. I then said, what about ancient history? And I was met with that's a good degree, but what are you going to do afterwards, type of thing. And then I was like, oh, actually, biology is quite interesting. Maybe I'll enjoy medicine. And then kind of how I ended up in medicine. I haven't really looked back that much since that decision. So yeah, it was not a choice of mine from a super young age. It was something that I decided a little bit later on in my teenage years.
Wow. Already from that story, you can see how different your journey was because of that exploration of being that singer songwriter. But I'm just going to put a pin in that for the moment and just kind of explore a bit more about those motivations. I think what's typical for many guests, certainly from heritages and cultural backgrounds like mine and yours, which is that there is a certain kind of expectation. And usually what I hear from guests is that whilst there was no hard pressure, there was like a subtle influence. And I think it's really funny that you describe it as your ancestors. You make it sound almost like dynastic from like generation upon generation of doctors. But just to ask about some of that dichotomy. You mentioned about exploring music, and then you talked about how did can we explore that a bit more in terms of how you balanced those two very different paths in relation to your decisions when you were quite young, like around 16, I assume.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for me, they aren't that different. I've never really seen science and the arts as distinct as people probably make them out to be. When I first started out in, the creative space and writing music particularly, I always saw it as kind of a cathartic outlet to try and really dump a lot of my teenage angst onto paper. And I went to an all boys school. I never really had any girlfriends from a young age, but I could imagine what like falling in love would feel like. And I remember when I was probably around 13, 12 years old when I started writing my first songs of like real heartbreak to Romeo Juliet style heartbreak. And my parents were so confused because they just didn't understand where all of this was coming from. But I think it was more just the emotion behind being able to feel something that you can imagine trying to feel, or eventually feeling at some point in your life. And I think it was more the cathartic nature of writing music and exploring these creative outlets. I always found really, really fascinating. And I think only as I grew up a little bit more, you start recognizing the effect that music has on you, more deeply on a psychological level as well, like in terms of when I'm revising for exams, you put on a certain type of music. When you're at the gym, you listen to a certain type of music, and everything in between. And as long as the music you're listening to is making you feel something, I would say that actually, as cliche as it sounds, that the kind of this mind body type of connection, I guess, but like the auditory stimuli are having a pretty tangible impact on your actual physiology. So I think, as I said, I kind of started out as a tool of almost acting through different emotions I may feel later on in my life. Then I use it as a tool of kind of, particularly in stressful scenarios, you'd write music to try and just have some kind of release. And then I think when I got into medicine and beyond, I started recognizing that actually there was quite an interplay between the two areas that are often seemed quite separate, which I'm not sure answers your question, but you can see there's been a little bit of a journey over those
No.
years.
I think it's just really great to kind of hear how you look at those two very kind of disparate fields and how you connected, and with a small nod to the physiology as well, linking it to something that's more kind of within the audience's wheelhouse. But just on the being that kind of singer-songwriter, a lot of us will have explored these things as hobbies. I took saxophone to grade 3, which I was pretty proud of myself. But
Yeah, no,
you
awesome.
got, but you got pretty far. So, like, that is really unique for yourself. So, can you walk us through, like, how that happened? Like, you went all the
Mm,
way to the States to pursue this. Talk us
mm.
through, that a bit more.
Yeah, I think when I was younger, like I said, I always enjoyed music. My parents are not particularly musical, and I think they were kind of channeling their own frustrations of the fact that they hadn't really explored the creative side of music themselves to channeling it into their kids, essentially. So I started playing guitar at a very young age, did all the grades, electric, acoustic, and then I started when I got into English. When I got into secondary school, I guess around 11 years old, I just started getting into writing a lot of poetry. And then an English teacher of mine was said, why don't you try and combine the two and try and combine poetry with music and like write songs? And that's kind of what I did. And around 14 years old, I entered a songwriting competition called the UK Songwriting Contest, which is still around today. And I can't remember what the song was called that I wrote, but anyway, I wrote this once again, kind of absolute, ode to heartbreak at 14, and I ended up somehow becoming a semi-finalist in the UK Songwriting Contest, competing with a bunch of adults essentially. And back in the day, I mean, this was, as I said, quite a while ago now, they'd give you a big book of industry contacts. And I said, well, this is kind of my opportunity to. This is probably not what I thought at the time, but looking back on it, it's like practice my cold emailing, essentially my cold outreach. And I emailed, 1,000 plus people in that book from every single major record label and publisher you could imagine. And that's how I found my first contacts in the industry over in LA, and my kind of first mentor to help me learn how to write top 40 songs and melodic math and everything in between in terms of how do you write songs that are earworms versus songs that are more heartfelt, and can you write a combination of both, and really just learning the ropes essentially of how do you write pop music was kind of where I was at initially. And then after that, kind of as I made my decision to go into medicine, I always had the plan of after F2 to explore medicine again, and that's what I did. I spent my F3 out in the States for around a year, working with top 40 artists and having a real whale of a time. And I came back kind of just before COVID, mainly because I knew COVID was going to be a big thing and everything was going to get locked down. And unfortunately, I didn't manage to spend as long out there as I was hoping, which was a few years. But honestly, like I don't regret a moment of it. It was just, it really was an incredible time, both when I was younger and later on as well. So I think it was always just something I wanted to explore further than kind of tinkering in my bedroom. And I think that minor competition success is probably what spurred me on a little bit more. And then, as with anything, once you have mentors and you have a network around you, I just got so obsessed with writing the best music I possibly could, which I think friends around me found a little bit odd around kind of GCSE time. But yeah, I really enjoyed it.
I mean, it's so incredibly brave to pursue that at such a young age. But then also, what I'm hearing as well is that you really hustled hard to make it in the industry. I think there are people who pursue being a an artist, as their main thing, and they don't get nearly as far as you've done. So, it's really impressive to kind of hear that. And so, in terms of describing that, it sounds like COVID and circumstances kind of curtailed that experience somewhat. But then I just want to press you a bit further, because to have gone into this and to have made such progress at such a young age, but then to come back to the UK and go into medical school and clinical training, that is like a really hard right turn, as it were. So how did you think about that at the time?
I saw it, and first of all, thank you so much for your kind words. I think like I've definitely not been a glowing success in the music industry as much as I was hoping to be. But there are many, many far more talented people out there when it comes to music. But I think to answer your question, I think I always saw, I often see my life as different seasons almost. So I saw my medical school career, I guess, like those 6 years, as a season of building really close friendships, getting some subject matter expertise where you can found a career upon if you want to continue down that career. And then a season of basically just growing personally, like growing in your values, what you stand for, who you are really as a person, in my case, as a man. And once again, as cliche as that sound, like that really is what that time was all about, was actually learning who I was, what I wanted to do with my time, and what I stood for as a person, and I guess morals and values and all those types of things. And those close friendships are kind of, I'd say, in those years are so important in forming who you are. And that classical statement of that you're the average of the five people around you, five closest friends. I think that was very much the case back then, because I was surrounded by people who were a little bit more entrepreneurial, had a little other things that they'd want to be doing outside of medicine. And also that season was very much where I got into academia, and I first
Mm,
started writing papers and got really excited by the academic world. And then the next season was kind of F1, F2, of actually like, how do you put all of this into practice, and how do you actually start making, like, earning your first few paychecks outside of music in my case, but like actually being an employee and having real responsibilities. And that was once again a very unique season of growth. But
mm,
after F2 was a very clear transition point for me, because it is the first time, how I viewed it anyway, in 10 plus years where you're stepping off a treadmill.
mm,
There is a transition where you have to really start thinking long and hard about, why am I doing what I'm doing, and do I really want to be doing the thing that I set out to be doing over 10 years ago? And sometimes the answers that you receive, or I received anyway myself, when I was asking myself these questions, are uncomfortable, and they're difficult to navigate. And then I was like, okay, now this next season, again in inverted commas, is about exploring other things you could be
mm.
doing, other things that really scratch an itch that maybe you haven't been able to scratch for quite a while. And that has led me down this somewhat eclectic career path that I've been on now. And I don't know what season this is, but we'll I think often you only know in retrospect, right? And I think I'll know in a few years' time.
So before we move on to some of your entrepreneurial ventures, I kind of want to deep dive a little bit on that experience of being both a medical student and as a junior doctor. What's unique about yourself is that you had this really interesting detour, as it were, in the music industry, which I think is extraordinarily unique. With that under your belt at such a young age, what was it like being a medical student and a junior doctor? Did you feel like you could progress the conventional path?
Thinking about medical school then first, more specifically, I'd say the satisfaction was not from the degree. Like
Mm,
that's 100% the case. Like to be perfectly frank, like medicine was not something, and I knew this relatively early on, that would be my main focus in my career or in my life. I really, despise is a strong word, but I really struggle with even feigning interest in rote learning thousands and thousands of facts,
mm,
even if I know that that will make me a good kind of, in inverted commas, doctor in the future. It's just something I've really struggled with, and I struggle to do things that don't interest me. And I found this at a youngish age. So medical school, the contentment or the happiness came from the friends that I made and the contacts that I made and the mentors that, have stood by me even after all these years.
Mm,
And the medical degree was somewhat of an aside, if you will. Um, it was a secondary to all the other things that I'd learnt about myself and who I was, and then also the relationships that I built. I think F1, F2 was slightly different in that I'd started actually getting a bit more of a tangible frustration with the system, to put it
mm,
lightly, and whether that is the constant hoop jumping that you have to do as you progress in your medical career, the poor pay, the pretty awful night shifts that destroyed me and destroy most people that do repeated night shifts, the belittling from senior staff who are clearly unhappy with their own circumstances and take them out on their junior colleague. Like the list goes on and on. I
mm.
was like, is this going to be the rest of my life? I don't know if it will, but I think I just need a break. I need to step off this treadmill for a little while and do something else. And I missed any type of creative outlet that I had disappeared during those 2 years of F1, F2 because you just don't have the time or the headspace, and it's just constant because you start F1 and people start talking about doing your postgraduate exams. Like you've just finished medical school and they're saying, okay, it's time to start revising for your MRCS. If you're going to start surgical training, get your surgical numbers up, get your portfolio going. I said, I don't really want to do any of that. I did end up doing some of it because of kind of when the people around you are doing those things, you feel somewhat like you should, which in hindsight I probably shouldn't have. But I think that is where the pure kind of more visceral frustration with being a doctor in the system came from was within those years of F1, F2, which I'm very grateful for because that's kind of what led to the subsequent few years.
Mhm. So then tell me, what happened next? It sounds like you'd really come to a kind of crossroads. You were
Mm.
frustrated with the system, as many, often do. How did you channel that? Like, what decisions or, experiences that did you take on next?
Mm. So as I said, I kind of made from an early decision during F1 that I was going to take a year out of medicine after F2, minimum. Like, and that was my time to explore, the creative side of things again in the States. So that was always the plan. And I did that, and I felt, it was an amazing time. Like, waking up by the beach, living by the palm trees, going to the studio every day with friends, writing music. It was a wonderful experience. But I did feel there was something bigger that I wanted to be doing, and I didn't know what that was. And once again, if it wasn't for COVID, I don't actually know where I would be right now, because my plan was to stay longer out there. So I came back, and I had this itch of kind of like I've explored music for a while. I wanted to do something else, and I think the key thing I realized was that I wanted to have some kind of impact on a larger scale. And I'm not sure when that realization came, but it was more of a realization that I didn't want to trade my time for money, but B, my time for impact. Like I want to be able to impact people even in my sleep, even when I'm not practically doing something. Can you build something that impacts people and positively on societies, that kind of thing, without just the time you're putting in? And that's also something I found frustrating as a medic was in your entire career, you're only really going to be impacting the people that you're seeing face to face on a daily basis. But I was like, well, actually, if you
Mm,
can build products, you'll not just impact the people that have, that you're seeing clinically, but also thousands and thousands more people than that, even when you're not working on that product directly anymore. So I think I came back in F3 and I said, if I was to build something that could impact people, what is the lowest barrier to entry now that, I'm stuck at home, medical students are stuck at home, everything's a little bit grim during COVID, of course. And what is the lowest barrier to entry when it comes to building a product without any money? And education was always the answer. Like that was the first answer that came to mind. And that's where kind of the first product I built, which was called ByteMedicine, came from, was during that F3 year, which I could talk a little bit more about. But I think really, once again, what set the foundations for building anything or wanting to do anything out of medicine was just figuring out what you valued and what you didn't and what you really wanted to be doing. It wasn't really a question of just doing things willy-nilly for the sake of it, as much as my career, looking back at it, kind of does feel like that in retrospect, was like, oh, there's this thing, you should do that, and then you should do this. I think that I'd like to think anyway, there was some element of being a bit more introspective about why I'm making those decisions in the first place.
And of course, a big part of your story is the founding of ByteWorld and ByteLabs, but I believe that you also joined one of the most successful UK healthcare startups, which was Cera. So where did that fit in to the master plan? What did that look like in the timeline?
So this was after around a year and a half of running ByteMedicine. So we had scaled to, well, we'd trained around 250,000-ish students by this point over kind of that year and a half, 2 year
Wow.
period. And thank you. And that was through a very, very hacky approach of how can you train as many students as possible to get them through their training and get them into the COVID workforce as fast as possible. Now that exams are cancelled, now that all these students are feeling quite lost and hopeless at home. And we basically just ran webinars every single day almost during COVID and to try and help people. And at one point, there were 1,000 people attending each of those webinars every single day from from all over Africa, from the Middle East, from Madagascar, everywhere in between. And that was a really wonderful experience. But anyway, it was just kind of the experience of building a product, scaling a product, understanding, the user journey, how do you do product validation, market research, all those types of things. It was kind of a very quick and very mini MBA in a very short period of time. And I thought, okay, how can I now? I've done this in ed tech for a little while. How can I transition and do this within the health tech space? And Sarah at this point had raised around 200 odd million. And I hadn't met Ben, who's the founder of Sarah personally, but I knew that he was an ex-doctor. And I said, wow, it must be incredible for an ex-doctor, their first startup ever to raise, hundreds of millions. Now they've raised over 500 million. It's pretty incredible what he and the team have achieved. So I said, how can I take some of my experiences and leverage it within healthcare? It was essentially the big question. And I thankfully had a friend of a friend, or sorry, a friend of mine who knew Ben incredibly well. And I was introduced to Ben through that friend, and Ben basically just gave me a shot and said, "Look, why don't you can work in product and data? You can use your skills from the entrepreneurial space and see what you can do within healthcare." At this point, I'd also had quite a bit of experience within academia. I think I'd published around 40 odd papers at this time. So I think Ben's question was, how can you leverage this somewhat unique blend of entrepreneurship plus academia plus clinical and bring it in-house into Cera to scale product. And that's how I ended up there. And yeah, I haven't talked about necessarily what I've done there, which I can do, but yeah, that most of that was about building really fast, scalable products within the domiciliary tech space in the UK.
And at that point, you mentioned delivering these incredible webinars that reached, hundreds, thousands of people across the world, which is, hats off to you. That's an amazing
Thank you.
achievement. But I guess ByteWorld was just getting liftoff. It was scaling, it was impactful, and then you've joined this rapidly growing startup. Am I right to say that ByteWorld was not yet a business? Like, where did this all kind of fit in your mind?
Mm.
Because you're basically balancing the two.
Yeah. So ByteWorld, well, it was, I mean, from a technical standpoint, yes, it was a for-profit business and it still is. But ByteMedicine itself, because we'd leveraged this period of COVID whereby we had a perfect audience, captive audience who's stuck at home, who needs help, we didn't create any revenue generating models associated with it whatsoever. So this was essentially what appeared to be to people to be a not-for-profit, just helping people at a time of need. And the short answer to your question is that it just wasn't, it wouldn't pay the bills, and I needed to start making some money. I couldn't go for more than 2 years without any salary whatsoever. So the question was, we can switch on a freemium model, which we did with ByteMedicine, and it was bringing in some money, but not enough to pay the co-founders plus the upkeep plus all the other things that go around building a SaaS product. And I guess the opportunity came about. I spoke to my other co-founders and I said, look, what if we keep building the business? You don't need to, I don't need a salary from the business. I'll still work on it. But let me explore the health tech industry. And I was very clear and upfront with Ben. I said, look, I need to keep building the company, but Sarah will be my primary focus in this period. And it was. And I think we had to basically just construct a methodology moving forward within the business that would work for everyone. And I think at the time, that was the thing that worked for us.
And then you stayed at Cera for a while. And how did you then make the decision to leave the organization? Was ByteWorld or ByteMedicine really taking off, or were there other factors at play?
Yes. So this was once again one of those pivotal periods in my professional career of what am I doing, why am I doing, and what do I want to be doing? And I think when I left, well, when I finished F2, I never finished F2 with the intention of never going back to medicine. My intention was to spend some time doing other things. And at this point, I was now coming up to around 3-ish years out of medicine. And for those of you who don't know, once you spend around 3.5 years plus out of medicine, it is trickier to return back into medicine or back into specialty training in my case because of a ton of paperwork you have to do, which I wasn't particularly keen on doing. So there was at Sarah, and I was thinking, I had this once again, this I keep using this phrase itch, but it kind of felt like that. It always feels like that at a time, something that almost keeps you up at night, of like, I never really gave any specialty training in medicine a shot. My intention was never to leave medicine at the time, anyway. So I had a few friends of mine who were in all sorts of training programs, and radiology was the one that really stuck out to me for my friends who were a little bit had other interests essentially outside of pure medicine, whether that was, you know, a business or, the arts and the creative side of things, that they seemed quite well balanced. And even the consultants, a lot of them were working from home. There was good work-life balance. And I came from a surgical background. My plan was always to go into surgery, and it just seemed very different to that, where surgery is, and understandably, it is your sole focus. You don't want a surgeon who, while they're operating you, is thinking about their drum rehearsal that they've got coming up soon or something like that. Like, you want them to be focused. And I'm not saying radiology is an easy specialty, but by no means is it easy. It's incredibly challenging mentally and intellectually taxing. But I wanted to give some kind of specialty training a try. And for me, it was largely between radiology and GP training. So while I was at Cera, I was thinking, okay, maybe in a year or so I can go into radiology. And I managed to get a radiology training number. And I was full time at Cera for around a year when I called Ben and said, look, I want to keep working within the company. I want to keep helping, particularly from producing more peer-reviewed research and evidence to support raising more money for the company, etc. But I feel a need to go back into specialty or to start specialty training at this point, and that's what I did after a year or so. And I continued with Sarah on a more of a consulting part-time basis for quite a while after that, and stumbled into radiology, where I am clinging on by a thread, but still here now.
It's funny. Like, I meet so many entrepreneurially minded clinicians, and many of them come from a radiology background. I don't know what it is about radiology that makes it attract so many kind of entrepreneur type individuals, but clearly there's something about that specialty. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned radiology and GP. Like, how much of your thinking about specialty training was influenced by a strategic planning, as it were, to fit all your wider interests?
Big time. I think I made a part of the story I didn't really even mention was I was about to start surgical training. Some Once again, timelines are blurry because I'm not great with timelines. At some point between that F2 and kind of F6 or whatever, I did apply for surgical training, and I got the kind of academic surgical training in London, and I was a couple of
Mm.
weeks from starting, and the consultant asked me to come in and just have a look at the department and meet people and things before starting. At this point, I'd been out of medicine for a number of years. I hadn't seen a patient for quite a while. And I went around the department and I just realized it wasn't for me. Like, this dream, in inverted commas, of mine from a young age of being this academic surgeon in London. This was my plan. You do MRCS. My dad is a surgeon. Like, it all makes sense. And in those moments, a few weeks before starting training, I was like, nope, this isn't it. Like, I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. Like, these surgeons, these surgical trainees, the consultants, they love being in theatre. They love operating. And when they're there, like, they're all in. And this is their one, professionally anyway, their one true love. And I couldn't pretend anymore that that was the case with me. So once again, arguably 10 years in the making of me doing all the papers and publications and presentations and basic surgical skills courses and exams and things, everything fell down within a few weeks of starting training and collapsed. And that whole worldview and your plans about your life fell through because you realize, well, I realized that there are other things I wanted to be doing. And I couldn't build a career in this space or as an academic surgeon in central London when there are so many other things that interested me. And I'm sure there are some. I'm sure there are some who manage that, but I realized that probably wasn't going to be me. So I then had to curate a career path that was more conducive to that. Uh, and as I'm sure a lot of our listeners know, going less than full time in your training is very common now in the NHS. But less than full time surgical training is from what I can see anyway, is far more challenging than less than full time in other training programs. So I said, even if I were to go less than full time in surgery, I just don't think I'd make it work. But more importantly, I think I wasn't being true to myself, and that is why I kind of whittled it down to radiology and GP, partly because they are faster training programs compared to others, and partly because when you look at the consultants or the post CCT doctors at the end of that process, I often saw much better rounded clinicians or clinicians who had other things that they really were wanting to do on the side, or a portfolio clinician. And I guess that's where I saw myself.
That makes a lot of sense. But, I wasn't aware of that story of you walking away from surgery. An academic surgical post in central London, many would kill for that. And you walked away from it, a few weeks before you were due to start. How difficult did you find making that decision and, quite frankly, informing, that consultant?
Was It's strange because I think the decision like hit me like a ton of bricks. Like the realization was so clear to me that I almost laughed at the time. I was like, "What have I been doing? This is insanity to me. Like I can't believe that it's this easy to just go through a path or follow a path just because it's been trodden before or because someone has said or that you felt at some point that this is the path for you, but never questioning it." So that moment of questioning and actually the realization hit me really hard. And I remember the moment it hit me really hard as well. The aftermath of that realization was really challenging because you have to call your super clinical and academic supervisors. You need to speak to them. You need to speak to your training program director. You have to sign all this paperwork. And it's always like, are you sure? Are you sure? Is this what you want to do? We'll give you a year out. We'll like, and they were so supportive. And I will never forget how supportive everyone was in this process. But they really tried to keep me on. And I said, and then there were moments like, oh, maybe I'll just reassess things in a year. But I said, actually, no, like that, there are sometimes difficult moments in your life where clinging on to the threads of what could have been or what you thought would have been just isn't, it's not healthy and it's not good for you. So I had to make a conscious decision of like, no, I can't cling on to this anymore. And then they always said, if you've accepted a training post and you then drop out, you can't come back into it. Like the NHS does tend to say that. And they said that to me, and I said, well, so be it. I'm making this decision. But then I think informing, family and friends and all those types of people who are like, oh, well, that's a bold move. But the subtext to bold is usually stupid. Um, but I think it was in the aftermath of what do I do now? That was probably the more challenging component.
Yeah, you're so right. The judgment from taking such a decision, I imagine, was probably quite intense because in
Mm.
some ways you had like a dream opportunity, and
Yeah.
I think what's clear is that you took a very brave decision. It sounded like you were maybe hedging your bets for quite a while, but at some point you do need to reach a decision and say, this is not for me, or to actually double down and commit on the thing that you truly care about. And it was the same for myself. I opted to stay in my foundation year training, even though, earlier into F2, pretty much at the start of F2, Anis and I decided to found Patchwork. And I thought to myself, oh, well, maybe I can continue on with my training. And I still made the decision to complete F2. But on reflection, I sometimes think maybe I should have been braver and actually just quit the program because it didn't make any material difference. I thought to myself, this was a good hedge to have completed foundation training so that I can then go on to specialty. But if I was to examine myself and my own beliefs, I would have never gone into specialty training, given the way that I am and the interest that I had. So, again, hats off for you for being much braver than me.
Well, that's very kind, but these are not easy decisions. Like I say it in retrospect, like it was a straightforward. I mean, it was the aftermath was challenging. Like there was a good 3 to 6 month period of what, particularly when what you thought you had planned out, everything comes
Mm,
crashing down to a degree. Like that was a really challenging time with some like really dark moments in there. So I think to say like, oh, it was a straightforward decision to make, I think that that would not be fair. And like the decision for you to continue in F2, it's a rational one,
mm,
and it's a bit of a hedge, but I think it's also rational to a degree. Like you're also, I would have found it far harder to have left during foundation training than to have left after, because that is almost a given that people finish foundation training, whereas people leaving medicine after F2 is, that's somewhat
mm.
more acceptable in the world's view, I would say, or from people that I've seen anyway. So yeah, regardless, I think it's a challenging decision.
Yeah, I think it's easy to look back in hindsight and say, well, I definitely didn't need to complete my foundation training. And as you said, it's all very rational. But I think also as well, like, for some kind of emotional certainty, that was quite important.
Right.
And, often when I describe these things, especially for doctors that want to take or clinicians as a whole that want to take an unconventional path, sometimes having a safety is important to then be able to take the risk down the line. Because I think I would have felt awful if I'd, quit midway through foundation, to go all in on a startup that is also incredibly high risk. It's like you've just got risk,
Mhm.
everywhere you turn.
Mhm.
So then
Agreed.
talking a bit more then about ByteWorld, where we're up to now is that you've had that experience in Cera in a fast-growing, successful scale-up. You've just decided to go into radiology training as well. What was then the trajectory of ByteWorld? And I guess it'd be really great to hear kind of how ByteLabs came about as well.
Yeah, sure. So yes, I'm a couple of years into radiology training, and in true fashion and being very true to myself, I'm thinking of taking some more time out of training now, exploring going back into tech, doing the business full time, even doing a PhD. So that's kind of where I'm at now, after coming up to 3 years of radiology. So in terms of where kind of what happened post kind of the Byte Medicine days, I guess, like I've said to you earlier, Jing, like often I think stories are quite helpful in framing a lot of this. So I think the earliest part of the business with biomedicine was the very primitive stage of like any hacky founder. Like even pre-biomedicine, the company was called Oski Bytes,
Mm,
and we were helping people prepare for their OSCE exams. And we had no money, and my colleague Schwabe and I, we were working together as F1s at Guys and Tommy's, and we wanted to put together a textbook to try and sell, and we'd work in the hospital till 6 p.m. and then we'd stay up all night till 4 in the morning in the library, trying to write this textbook. And we couldn't afford paper, so we'd go up onto the urology ward at 3 in the morning and we'd say, "Could we borrow 1,000 pieces of paper?" Which we've now returned, because we need to print this textbook. And we went around to every consultant saying, "We can't pay you anything to have your name in this textbook, but we'd love to have it because it makes it look more legitimate." And that the whole point I'm telling you the story is kind of like that is the very hacky kind of, and I'm sure you can relate to the elements of that of like starting any business. It's not pretty and it's not sexy. Um, but then when we had a little bit of success with biomedicine, we were then thinking, okay, we've got a couple of options. We can become the new, up and comer, become a pass med, become a pass test or an amboss. but we wanted to try and do something different whilst retaining the biomedicine platform. And I've now had a kind of roughly a year at Cera, and being a clinician in the health tech space, you end up meeting a lot of other clinicians in the health tech space. And when I did, I got introduced to a lot of people. And one chap that I met was a guy called Ridian. Ridian was post F2. He was, I think, one of the co-founders or early stage employees of a company called Pando, which was a health tech company. And he had left medicine. He was working at Newman at the time with a couple of other friends of mine. We met one another and we realized that we both were getting constantly asked questions from clinicians about how do you develop careers in the health tech space? How do you build health tech products? And we realized actually there were very few resources out there beyond going to do a 1 year master's in digital health, for example. Like beyond those really big time and financial commitments, there were little opportunities out there for people to learn kind of the skills, gain the experience, or build a network of people that they could learn from to transition into health tech companies or digital health roles. So long story short, we started ByteLabs, which is kind of the second part of the ByteWorld family, with the aim of providing clinicians with those opportunities. And we started off with a very kind of small scale fellowship program over 8 weeks. And we've scaled now, running it for a couple of years, to a few thousand clinicians who have been through our program, which is essentially a pretty robust curriculum covering things like lean canvas for clinicians, clinical product management, regulatory and compliance in the UK, where clinicians build real world products. They pitch these at the end of the 8 weeks, kind of either for investment or to demonstrate a portfolio of skills that they've developed, and then gain roles at health tech companies. So and that's led us to all sorts of really cool places with incredible partnerships, and now over to the US as well. So I think it was about kind of identifying a need, a real pain point for a lot of people, and then bringing together an incredible team that can actually build something that solves that problem. And now we're at the point of how do you scale this up and scale it rapidly? And that is what I'm doing this afternoon as well. The continued workshops on this is trying to figure that question out.
And I guess in all of this, you've scaled ByteWorld, you've launched ByteLabs, which is incredibly well known within our networks, and you're doing all of this while still being a radiology trainee. How are you balancing these two really great kind of opportunities, but both kind of taxing in their own right?
I think being on a training program with consultants that are understanding makes a massive difference. And I was very upfront and honest with my consultants early on, particularly my educational supervisor, saying, look, there are other things I'm doing. I can show you the numbers. I can show you how many people the tech that we've developed have impacted, the people that we've trained, what they've gone on to do. I can give you all of this, and you tell me whether you think this is perceived value or not. And if you think it is, then all I'm asking for is a little bit more flexibility. So, long story short, we ended up creating a training program that really works for me. I am less than full time. I thankfully don't
Mm,
do any night shifts and things like that, which really, as any clinician knows, kind of does destroy you. And I think
mm.
having a really supportive consultant makes a world of difference, and having the flexibility of going less than full time as well makes a big difference. I think having supportive family members and supportive partner who understands that your career is a little bit unusual also really does help. But I think alongside all of that, it does take a lot of being really strict with yourself and being very organized and really time boxing your time in terms of if I'm at work working clinically, like that is my clinical time. I can't let other things spill into that time because otherwise what ends up happening is you end up doing an okay job at too many things and not actually doing justice to any one specific thing. And I've fallen into that trap before. So I think that is something that I learned is like if I'm doing business stuff, nothing else can be bothering me. Like I do other bits and pieces, like I still work in academia and some venture bits, some
Mm.
advisory bits, but like if I'm doing business stuff and I'm doing a workshop, none of that other stuff can bother me. And if I'm in the hospital, nothing else can bother me. And I think that that has actually helped me learn the art of really time boxing and protecting your time well. And similarly, like if I'm with my partner and with my family and things, then it's, do not disturb mode. No one can bother me unless something is burning down. And I think that that's super important as well. But always like a constant challenge, and I'm sure it's something that you've had to try and navigate massively as well.
Yeah, I've definitely needed to navigate that, and a lot of peers, colleagues, and even guests will describe the challenges of maintaining that discipline. Training and treating patients and being in a hospital environment is such a privileged kind of experience. But as you've kind of identified, and as I've personally experienced, it can also be very frustrating as well, and actually very hierarchical and very slow. So, on the one hand, you have this very unique experience, but also challenging because it's a large bureaucratic, quite frankly, and hierarchical organization where things just happen very slowly and things are the way that they are. But on the flip side, you're building out this business, and by nature of it being smaller, more agile, your decisions have real impact and you're able to move so much quicker and enact your ideas. It sounds like you maintain that discipline, but how do you
Hmm.
view that? Because, for someone like yourself, you're coming to the end of your training. You've got things like exams. You've got things like, filling out 40 reflections in your portfolio. You balance that with, making decisions and calling the shots on a fast-growing startup. How do you balance those two feelings?
I think in the list of things you said there, exams are by far the worst. Like radiology exams are really, really tough. Like as much as I said earlier on, oh, it's 5 years, it's work-life balance, X, Y, and Z. The exams are not a joke. And I think that is something I've struggled with the most is trying to balance the exams with building the business and all the other little bits and pieces in between. So I'm not going to, there is no kind of golden bullet here. There is no one piece of advice I can give to trying to get through that because I can't, like, even now, I can't, I'm really struggling to balance oh my goodness, you have an exam coming up in November. I should start revising sometime soon. And a lot of my colleagues are revising now, but I just can't. Like, there's too much else to be done. And I'm just not in the headspace for it. And I think when your mind is taken up by so many different things, that is something you can't just step aside from a business and say, we're going to give this to someone else. Someone else can manage my entire workload for the next 6 months while I revise. It doesn't really work like that as a founder.
Yeah.
And that is the biggest struggle. I think, work-based place assessments, reflections, all these types of things, I think as clinicians and med students as well, you learn that these are the hoops you have to jump through, and most people jump through them. Like, yes, you do them all at the end, a week before the deadline is not ideal, but that's often what happens to me. But the exams are much more of a struggle, and that's something I'm still figuring out. And I still have a couple of years of training left, and I think I'm getting once again that itch that I've kept describing that has come back. Much to everyone's frustration around me, is trying to figure out what to do next year for the next couple of years, and then coming back to training potentially. So yeah, it's still a struggle, Jing, all the time.
Do you see yourself becoming and working as a consultant?
If you're my training program director and you're listening to this, please please tune off right now. No, I think I'd like to think that it's something that I could achieve. Mm, I have learnt not to try and really say that something is definitely going to happen or not, because it's something, if the right opportunity came about, if the business was in a position where actually, we could go for an exit in a couple of years' time, and God willing, maybe I wouldn't even need to work as a consultant radiologist. Like, there's loads of things in between. It's kind of, it's hard to predict. I think from an achievement standpoint, I would love to say that despite all the other nonsense going on in my professional life over the last 10 years, that I still managed to finish training. Like, that would be an incredible achievement that I would feel.
Mm.
But there are still some big, big hurdles to get through to get to that point. So I'm not sure is my answer. But to my training program director, I love radiology and there's nothing else I'd rather be doing.
Very, very diplomatic answer. And I think probably a fair one as well, because I think in the journey to get to where we both are today, having a fixed mindset is never a good idea. You should be flexible. And I'm sure that, you get a lot of reward from being a radiologist.
Mm.
I reflect on my time as a clinician, and I left medicine quite early. But I always hold that like tinge of regret that I couldn't pursue a similar kind of training pathway and then have that satisfaction of at least having the option of being a consultant. But I think the things that I was pursuing, I was on an academic endocrine pathway. I would have been general medicine. If you think about things kind of strategically, that is very hard to balance. The acute medical take alongside, being chief operating officer and, putting out the fires in a tech startup. It's a lot. So
Yeah, definitely.
I want to finish off with one final question, which is, and you've kind of touched upon bits and pieces, but what is one piece of practical advice that you would give other clinicians who are looking to pursue other opportunities or maybe leave the traditional pathway? What would you advise them?
I think it's a challenging question because there's no one piece of practical advice I would give. I think that to say that there was one big piece is not something that would be fair on how particularly psychologically challenging the decision of taking time out to do other things or to even
Mm,
leave medicine. And when I say psychologically challenging, it's because that is, in my experience, has always been the biggest challenge. Um, so if I were to pick one piece of advice, I would say it's probably to surround yourself with people who are building careers or building a life that you aspire to live, essentially. Because what I've found is having left medicine for quite a while, I've now, most of my friends are, wholeheartedly out of medicine and they're doing all sorts of other things, but bringing like incredible value to patients in their own ways. And I think when I go through my numerous existential crises of what am I doing with my life and what should I be doing, you can bring together people who have kind of been there and done that and gone through exactly the same challenges as you. And I had a birthday last about a week and a half ago, and I brought together a bunch of my friends together. And I think there were like 20, 30 friends, and almost everyone had the same or similar psychological challenges. And
mm,
when you surround yourself with people like that, yes, sometimes it can get toxic because you become an echo chamber and everyone's super
yeah.
frustrated about the same things. That is always like the slight challenge associated with this. But also, you're not alone. And in this process, you are then going to meet people like I met Ben through a friend of a friend. Well, through this network of people that you've got around you, you will always be able to meet really inspiring and valuable people as well that you can build close relationships with. So I think that is something that really changed my life, is feeling like there is a community around me that really, once again, as cliche as it sounds, like really understands you and what you're going through. But the only way to do that is to really put yourself out there and do that very un-British thing of cold
Mm,
outreach, going to events, talking to people, and be willing to talk about yourself and what you want and who you are and why you're great. And all of that's super uncomfortable, and I still find it really
yeah.
uncomfortable. But it's kind of, if the end result is you have a great community that will support you and vice versa, there's a little bit of, a few uncomfortable moments to try and actually forge that.
Well, that is fantastic advice. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Azim. It's really great to kind of hear the unconventional path that you've taken, and also to see how you've scaled a business whilst also staying in clinical training. It's not always the case that you need to completely leave, and I think you are definitely a fantastic example of that.
Thank you so much, Jing. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
And for those listening, if you like what you hear and want to support the show, please do like and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, whatever podcast platform you're currently listening to. It would mean a lot to me, and it would really help spread the word to other clinicians who are also exploring alternative paths. So thanks for joining us, and see you next time. Bye bye.